the first sentence says it's unethical for journalists to lie, right? And then they define that to say something untrue with the purpose of deceiving the listener. So that's a very specific instance of lying. However, so when the author says that it is unethical to do this, does the author agree with that first sentence? I think so. I mean, this is not attributed to anyone else. It just says, hey, it's unethical for journalists to do this, to lie, and here's my definition of lying. But then this next sentence says, so I don't know whether that's the main conclusion, I don't know if that's a premise, we just like, okay, you think this is unethical. But the next sentence says, however, so that's a little strange. Maybe you're about to clarify what you're saying or what you think. Journalists commonly withhold relevant information in interviews in order to elicit new information. So notice what this is doing. It's talking about a different case. So the first sentence is something the author agrees with, says, hey, it's unethical to do this. And the second sentence is like, but there's these other cases that are different, where you're withholding information rather than actively, well, they don't get into actively, but saying something untrue is different than withholding information, right? So we have two different cases. And then the third sentence is what kind of sentence?
Concession.
It might be a concession. It's also
Opinion
of others, right? So some argue that this, like lying, is intentional deception and therefore unethical. So some people are arguing that this second case, unlike the first one, is also unethical. Not unlike it, but like it, is also unethical. And we would expect the author to disagree with them, right? Because they usually do. And lo and behold, it says, however, this argument that you just read fails to recognize the distinction between failing to prevent a false belief and actively encouraging one. That's a little wordy, but bottom line, the difference between the two cases, right? Okay. Then we have, so I expect that to be the conclusion. The author is disagreeing with the opinion of others. Lying is unethical because it actively encourages a false belief. So clearly this person thinks that the second case is not unethical. The first case is unethical. Why? Because there's a distinction between them. Okay. The journalist argues by doing what? A, pointing out a difference between two cases being compared. So far, so good. In order to show that their conclusion based on their similarities, notice the people who argued in the third sentence said, like lying, those are the similarities, should not be drawn. That conclusion should not be drawn because there's distinction between them. This is a pretty good answer. Keep it open. Answer choice B, defending what the journalist considers a controversial distinction. Okay, the journalist is certainly defending a distinction, but is it one that the journalist considers controversial? We have no idea, right? So this is not describing exactly what's happening, so it's wrong. Also, the rest of it's weird. Answer choice C, defining a concept. And does the author define a concept? Yeah. And then showing that under this definition, the concept applies to all of the cases? No, only one of the cases. And that's why they're different. So C is out because of all. D, appealing to a counterexample to undermine an ethical principle. No, the author originally agreed with the ethical principle. So the author is not trying to undermine it, right? E, clarifying and defending a moral principle. The author clearly agrees with the first sentence, but I don't think the purpose of this is to defend that moral principle. The purpose of this argument is to disagree with the people who think that other cases are also unethical, right? So this is not the best description of what's happening. Questions? Was CE the most tempting? Mm-hmm. Yeah. This might be... I think it just still comes down to that the author that's not the purpose of this passage, to clarify and defend a moral principle. Instead, we're going to take that moral principle and we're going to say in what cases it applies and in what cases it doesn't apply. It's a little different than saying the moral principle is something that is true.
But that's also not what the question is asking. You see what I'm saying? It's not the purpose of the article, but the question is asking the purpose of the article. It's asking
what's going on, right? The journalist argues by doing what? And if this is not what the journalist is doing, then I don't think that's I think we can say is, what are you trying to do? And so we kind of get into the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the question is kind of, to some extent, asking what is happening here. And that is going to come back to the purpose a little bit. I mean, I know it's not worded that way like it is in
Yeah.
reading comp, but
Right.
it's kind of related. That's that. Yes?
What's a case? Like, what's the difference between case or example or instance?
So-
What does case really mean?
A case is just a situation.
Situation?
Yeah, so we have two situations, one in which you're withholding information and one in which you're not. So those are two different cases.
Okay.
Cases can be very specific or they can be very general. Like in law, you can talk about two different cases. A situation or a case when people come in with a weapon or when they don't. Those are two different cases. How do we deal with them? We deal with them differently, right? Examples are specific. You're going to talk about a specific example that's going to be evidence for some broader case, maybe.
Okay.
Like you could say, hey, we have two cases, one where people come in with a weapon, one where they don't. For example, when Joey came in with a water gun, that was not a weapon. It's actually not a good example. 'Cause we do need to clarify that sometimes, apparently. Sad. Okay, anyways. What was your last case? Instance? Instance is,
Feels like that's in B.
B.
I didn't-
Oh, a clear instance. That sounds like an example. That would be an example.
Example?
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the same as, like, if you say for example or for instance, same thing. Okay, cool. Any other questions on this? All right.